What if I told you that at McLaren not everything is as transparent as it seems? What would happen if an engineer revealed that one of his drivers was racing at a technical disadvantage, deliberately? Today I bring you the truth behind the drama that broke out at McLaren after the 2025 Mexican GP. The 2025 Mexican Grand Prix began as just another chapter on the calendar, but ended up revealing a truth that left the entire paddock speechless. What seemed to be just another race in the fight for the championship between the two McLaren drivers, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, became the epicenter of a technical controversy that exposed the hidden fissures within the most dominant team of the moment. And it all began in the silence of the garages, where telemetry spoke louder than any public statement. From the first free practice session at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, something did not fit in Oscar Piastri's box. His pace in the short run was erratic, his handling under braking seemed unsafe, and steering wheel corrections were more frequent than usual. Looking at the data, Tom Stallard, his race engineer, noticed a worrying pattern. Oscar was systematically losing time in the track's most technical corners, especially in the aggressive braking in the Forosol area and Turn 1. It wasn't a question of talent or nerves, it was a measurable, constant loss that could not be attributed to simple adaptation to the circuit. During FP2, Stallard told Piastri over the radio that he should challenge the braking and rear slide more. At first glance, it seemed like a simple technical suggestion. But between the lines, the phrase hit a silent urgency. Oscar wasn't getting the same out of the car as Lando Norris. Something similar had happened in Austin, but here in Mexico, the margin widened. At the end of that day, the telemetry was devastating. Corner after corner, Piastri lost between 1 and 2 milliseconds compared to his teammate. That difference, imperceptible to the human eye, was transformed into a loss of half a second per lap. In qualifying, the total deficit was close to 0.6. But the most serious thing was not the difference, but its origin. The engineers found no faults in Piastri's car. There were no obvious piloting errors either. Everything pointed to an underlying problem. The car required a driving technique that had not been clearly communicated, or worse still, that was not applicable with the technical package that had been given to the Australian driver. In parallel, Lando Norris began to dominate the heavy braking sectors with a confidence that contrasted brutally with the insecurity visible in Oscar. While one attacked corners with pinpoint precision and perfect tactile feedback, the other navigated an unstable car, unable to clearly read the available grip. And this technical asymmetry did not go unnoticed by anyone within the team. McLaren has always defended a policy of equality between its drivers, but on that weekend for the first time, the official narrative cracked. Reality showed that not all available material was shared equitably. And although publicly an attempt was made to maintain neutral discourse, behind closed doors, the frustration of Piastri and his team was palpable. What began as a simple difference in pace had turned into a suspicion of technical favoritism. Saturday's qualifying sealed the drama. Oscar placed 8th, later promoted to 7th due to penalties, while Lando qualified on the front row. A difference that could not be justified with hands or adaptation alone. It was the beginning of a storm that would not only affect the Papaya team's competitive environment, but also threaten to alter the narrative of equality that McLaren had sustained since its resurgence in 2024. Saturday's qualifying in Mexico not only sealed Oscar Piastri's frustration, it marked a breaking point. The performance gap between the two McLarens was so large and so evident that it could no longer be justified with technical euphemisms or strategic explanations. While Lando Norris secured a privileged position on the grid, Piastri sank to an 8th position that would later become 7th, thanks only to a third-party penalty. It was the worst relative result among teammates since the beginning of the season. And the most worrying thing, it was no exception. It was part of a trend that had been growing race after race. Tension exploded when, just an hour after the end of the session, McLaren called a closed-door meeting in his motorhome. It wasn't a routine tech check or a pre-race pep talk. It was a contention meeting. The presence of director Andrea Stella, technical leader Peter Prodromou, and the main engineers from both sides of the garage made it clear that this was something more serious. No one from the communications department was invited. The atmosphere was dense, and what was discussed there completely changed the internal perception of the situation. According to sources close to the team, the meeting began with a technical presentation of the telemetry differences between Norris and Piastri. The engineers presented the raw data, times per sector, brake pressure, tire temperature, lines. Everything pointed to the same thing. It wasn't that Piastri drove badly. It was that the car did not respond with the same stability in slow corners, nor with the same level of traction in difficult exits. That's when the unexpected arose. One of the engineers of car number 81 asked out loud, "Why are we still not accessing the new suspension geometry if it has already been tested and validated for 5 Grands Prix?" The subsequent silence was devastating. Stallard, visibly uncomfortable, admitted that he had previously conveyed that concern to the technical managers, but that the decision came from above. As revealed in that room, McLaren had chosen to concentrate its development resources on a single evolutionary package, prioritizing Norris's car based on criteria that have not yet been fully explained. It was not a decision clearly communicated to Piastri or his technical environment, which aggravated the feeling of betrayal. Andrea Stella tried to calm things down, justifying the choice as a resource optimization strategy in the evaluation phase, an expression that in practice left more questions than answers. The atmosphere became harsh. Engineers on Piastri's side demanded more transparent explanations. There was even discussion of the possibility of implementing the modified suspension for Sunday's race, even if it was in suboptimal conditions. But it was already late. The settings were closed, the simulations were done, and there was no time to reconfigure the entire car in less than 12 hours. Piastri remained silent for much of the meeting, watching with a mix of disappointment and forced serenity. When he finally spoke, he did so with a short but meaningful sentence. "If we are not all playing with the same cards, what is the point of all this?" Nobody responded. It wasn't necessary. That night, McLaren abandoned any attempt to hide the obvious. His supposed internal equity had been broken. What until then had been a cohesive team with a common technical plan and a shared vision, became emotionally divided. The Papaya garage fragmented into 2 narratives, that of the title contender who receives the complete package, and that of the driver who, despite his talent, is relegated to fighting with incomplete tools. And so, what began as a difference in mechanical parts escalated into a crisis of confidence. Because in modern Formula One, the true advantage is not always in the fastest car, but in the driver that the team has decided to promote. And that decision at McLaren was more exposed than ever. When a Formula One team reaches the top, the real challenge is not in winning but in staying together. At McLaren, that delicate balance began to crack just after the Mexican Grand Prix. What until recently was an exemplary relationship between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris began to transform into a silent rivalry, fueled not by public statements, but by data, internal decisions and the growing feeling that someone within the team had changed the rules of the game without warning. Andrea Stella, aware of the situation, tried to restore calm. He spoke of technical balance, different driving contexts, and a natural progression in the evolution of the car. But his words failed to erase the impression that McLaren had made a decision to prioritize Norris as its main bet for the title. It was not official, it was not written in any statement, but the facts were undeniable. Norris received updates first, had more access to simulation resources and, according to several internal reports, his feedback was used as the main reference for the new aerodynamic configurations of the MCL39. Piastri, however, is not a driver who accepts the second-place role easily. His Australian mentality, forged in junior categories where he had to fight against entire structures to excel, made him especially sensitive to the perception of unequal treatment. Over the weekend in Mexico, in brief but carefully measured statements, he let his frustration show. "We are learning a lot about the car, although sometimes not with the same tools." It was an indirect message but clear. He did not accuse. He didn't deny either. He was simply pointing out the obvious. Within McLaren there was no longer full technical equality. Thus, McLaren finds itself facing a question that could define its destiny in the championship. Can a team sustain an internal struggle without breaking down in the attempt? The history of Formula One has shown time and time again that internal rivalry can destroy even the strongest giants. What today seems like a simple technical disagreement can, with the passing of races, become an irreversible rupture. In Woking they know it. And although officially everything is still under control, within the walls of the Papaya team there is already an unmistakable feeling, that of a balance that is slowly breaking, a tension that no statement can hide. The storm has begun, and what is at stake is not just a title, but the very identity of McLaren as a united team. And this, in the context of a world championship that is defined by thousands, could make an irreversible difference. Do you think McLaren is deliberately favoring Norris? Or do you consider that these are simply poorly managed but not malicious technical decisions? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.